Hello, my friends. Welcome back to our long cold campfire. While I throw some wood back on the flames to get our fire going again, I just wanted to say that I've missed you deeply, and I'm so glad to see you again. It's been a crazy year, and I'm glad we've had one another to help get through it. And here's to a new year, full of adventures and excitement and a brand new array of stories to tell one another. So have a seat and warm up by the campfire as I regale you with our first story of the brand new year. This is New Year's Night by Henry Lawson. Stay a while and listen. It was dark enough for anything in Dead Man's Gap, a round, warm, close darkness in which retreating sounds seemed to be cut off suddenly at a distance of 100 yards or so, instead of growing faint and fainter and dying away to strike the ear once or twice again, and after minutes it might seem, with startling distinctness before being finally lost in the distance as it is on clear, frosty nights. So with the sounds of horses' hooves stumbling on through the rough bridle track through the saddle, the clatter of hoof-clipped stones and scrape of gravel down the hidden siding, and the low sound of men's voices, blurred and speaking in monosyllables at the intervals it seemed, and in hushed, awed tones, as though they carried a corpse. To practical eyes, grown used to such darkness, and at the nearest point, the passing blurs would have suggested two riders on bush hacks leading to a third with an empty saddle on its back. A lady's or side saddle, if one could have distinguished the horns. They may have struck a soft track or level, or rounded the buttress of the hill higher up. But before they had time to reach or round the foot of spur, blurs, whispers, stubble, and clatter of hoofs, jingle of bridle rings, and the occasional clink together of iron stirrups seemed to shut off as suddenly and completely as though a great soundproof door had swung behind them. It was dark enough, on the glaringest of days, down in the lonely hollow or pocket, between two spurs, at the head of a blind gully behind Mount Buckaroo, where there was more or less dusty patch, barely defined even in broad daylight by a spidery dog-legged fence on three sides, and a thin two-rail running along the frontage. In about the middle of it, a little slab hut, overshadowed by a big stringy-barked shed, was pointed out as Johnny Mears's farm. "Black as charcoal," said Johnny Mears. He had never seen coal, and was a cautious man whose ideas came slowly. He stooped close to the fence, with his hands on his knees, to sky the loom of his big shed, and so get his bearings. He had been to have a look at the penned calves, and to see that all the slip rails were up and pegged, and for the words of John Mears, Jr., especially when delivered rapidly and shrilly in the injured tones, were not to be relied upon in these matters. "It's hot enough to melt the belly out of my fiddle," said Johnny Mears to his wife, who sat on a three-legged stool by the rough table in a little whitewashed end room, putting a patch of patches over the seat of a pair of moleskin knickerbockers. He lit his pipe, moved a stool to the side of the great empty fireplace, where it looked cooler, might have been cooler on account of a possible draught suggested by the presence of the chimney, and where, therefore, he felt a breath cooler. He took his fiddle from a convenient shelf, turned it slowly and carefully, holding his pipe in his mouth, well up to one side, as if the fiddle were an inquisitive and restless baby. He played little drops of brandy 3 times right through, without variations, blinking solemnly the while. Then he put the violin carefully back in its box and started to cut up another pipeful. "You should have gone, Johnny," said the haggard little woman. "Reckon the horses out a night like this," retorted Johnny, "and start plowing tomorrow? It ain't worth the while. Let 'em come for me if they want. Dance on a night like this, why, they'll dance in." "But you promised. It won't do you no good, Johnny." "Won't do me no harm," the little woman went on stitching. "It's smothering hot," said Johnny, with an impatient oath. "I don't know whether I'll turn in or turn out under the shed tonight. It's too damned hot to roast indoors." She bent her head low over the patch. One smoked, and the other stitched in silence for 20 minutes or so, during which time Johnny might be supposed to have been deliberating listlessly as to whether he'd camp out on account of the heat or turn in. But he broke the silence with a cloud of a mosquito on the nape of his neck and a bad word. "I wish you wouldn't swear so much, Johnny," she said wearily. "At least not tonight." He looked at her blankly. Why not tonight? What's the matter with you tonight, Mary? What's tonight more than any other night to you? I see no harm. A man can't swear when a mosquito sticks him." "I was only thinking of the boys, Johnny." "The boys? Well, they're both on the hay in the shed." He stared at her again, shifted uneasily, crossed the other leg tightly, frowned, blinked, and reached for the matches. "You look a bit off color, Mary. It's the heat that makes us all a bit ratty at times. Better put that away and have a swill of oatmeal and water and turn in." "It's too hot to go to bed. I couldn't sleep." "I'm all right. I'll just finish this. Just reach me a drink from the water bag. The pannikin's on the hob there by your boot." He scratched his head helplessly and reached for the drink. When he sat down again, he felt strangely restless. "Like a hen that don't know where to lay," he put it. He couldn't settle down or keep still, and didn't seem to enjoy his pipe somehow. He rubbed his head again. "There's a thunderstorm coming," he said. "That's what it is, and the sooner it comes, the better." He went to the back door and stared at the blackness to the east, and sure enough, lightning was blinking there. "It's coming sure enough. Just hang out and keep cool for another hour. You'll feel the difference." He sat down again on the three-legged stool, folded his arms with his elbows on his knees, drew a long breath, and blinked at the clay floor for a while. Then he twisted the stool round on one leg until he faced the old-fashioned spiraled wooden clock that stood alone on the slab of shelf over the fireplace. The hands indicated 2:30, and Johnny, who had studied the clock and could hit the time nigh enough by it, after knitting his brows and blinking at the dial for a full minute by its own hand, decided that it must be getting on toward 9 o'clock. It must have been the heat. Johnny stood up, raking his hair, turned to the door and back again, and then, after an impatient gesture, took up his fiddle and raised it to his shoulder. Then the queer thing happened. He said afterwards, under conditions favorable to such sentimental confidence, that a cold hand seemed to take hold of the bow, through his, and anyway, before he knew what he was about, he had played the first parts of "When First I Met Sweet Peggy," a tune he had played often 20 years before in his courting days, and had never happened to play since. He saw it right through, standing up, and then stood with the fiddle and bow trembling in his hands, with the queer feeling still on him, and a rush of old thoughts going through his head, all of which he set down afterwards to the effect of the heat. He put the fiddle away hastily, damming the bridge of it at the same time in loud but hurried tones, with the idea covering any eccentricity which the wife might have noticed in his actions. "Must got a touch of sun," he muttered to himself. He sat down, fumbled with knife, pipe, and tobacco, and presently stole a furtive glance over his shoulder at his wife. The washed-out little woman was still sewing, but stitching blindly, for great tears were rolling down her worn cheeks. Johnny, white-faced account of the heat, stood close behind her, one hand on her shoulder and the other clenched on the table, but the clenched hand shook as badly as the loose one. "Good God, what's the matter, Mary? You're sick." They had little or no experience of illness. "Tell me, Mary, come on now. Has the boys been up to anything?" "No, Johnny, it's not that." "Well, what is it then? You're taking sick? What have you been doing with yourself? Might be fever." "Hold up a minute. You wait here while I restat the boys and send them for the doctor and someone—" No, I'm not sick, John. It's only a turn. I'll be all right in a minute." He shifted his hand to her head, which she dropped suddenly, a life-weary sigh against his side. "Now then," cried John wildly, "don't you faint or go into hysterics, Mary. It'll upset the boys. Think of the boys. It's only the heat. You're all taking queer." "It's not that. You all know better than me than that. It was Johnny, I was only thinking. We've been married 20 years tonight, and it's New Year's night. And I've never thought of it, Johnny said to himself. Shows what a godforsaken selection will make of a man. She thought of it all the time and was waiting for it to strike me. Why, I'd agreed to go and play at the dance at the old pipe clay schoolhouse all night, that very night, and leave her at home because she hadn't asked to come. And it never struck me to ask her. At home, by herself in this hole, for 25 bob. And I only stopped at home because I'd got the hump, and I knew they'd want me bad at the school. They sat close together on the long stool by the table, shy and awkward at first, and she clung to him at opening of thunder, and they started apart guiltily when the first great drops sounded like footsteps on the gravel outside, just as they'd done one nighttime before, 20 years before. If it was dark before, it was black now. The edge of the awful storm cloud rushed up and under the original darkness, like the best drop black brushed over cheap lamp variety, turning it gray by contrast. The deluge lasted only a quarter of an hour, but it cleared the night and did its work. There was hail before it too, big as emu eggs, said the boys. They lay feet deep in the old digger's holes on pipe clay for days afterwards. Weeks, some said. The two sweethearts of 20 years ago and tonight watched the retreat of the storm and seeing Mount Buckaroo standing clear. They went to the back door, which opened opposite the end of the shed, and saw to the east a glorious arch of steel blue, starry sky, with distant peaks showing clear and blue away back under the faraway stairs in the depth of it. They lingered a while, arms round each other's waists, before she called the boys, just as they had done this time in a night of 20 years ago, after the boys' grandmother had called her. "All right, Mother," bawled back the boys, with unfailable independence of youth. "We're all right. We'll be in directly. Wasn't it a Peltier, Mother?" They went in and sat down again, the embarrassment beginning to wear off. "We'll get out of this, Mary," said Johnny. "I'll take Mason's offer for the cattle and things, and take that job at Dawson's, boss or no boss." Johnny's bad luck was due to his inability in the past to get on with any boss for any reasonable length of time. "I get the boys on, too. They're doing no good here and growing up. It ain't doing justice to them, and what's more, this life's killing you." "Mary, that settles it. I was blind. Let the jumped-up selection go. It's making a wall-eyed bullock of me, Mary. A dry-rider rag of wall-eyed bullock like Jimmy Knowles' old strawberry. And you'll live in town like a lady." "Somebody coming!" yelled the boys. There was a clatter of slip rails hurriedly thrown down and clipped by horses' hoofs. "Inside there. Is that you, Johnny?" "Yes." "I knew they'd come for you," said Mrs. Mears to Johnny. "You'll have to come, Johnny. There's no get out of it. Here's Jim Mason with me. We've got orders to stun you and pack you if you show fight. The blessed fiddler from Mudgee didn't turn up. Dave Regan burst his concertina and they're in a fix. But I can't leave the missus." "That's all right. We've got the school's Mrs. Marin side saddle. She says you ought to be jolly well ashamed of yourself, Johnny Mears, for not bringing your wife on New Year's night, and so you ought." Johnny did not look shamefaced, for reasons unknown to them. "The boys couldn't find the horses," put in Mrs. Mears. "Johnny was just going down the gully again." He gave her a grateful look and felt a strange, new thrill of admiration for his wife. "And here's a bottle of the best put by for you, Johnny," added Pat McDermott, mistaking Johnny's silence. "And we'll call it 30 bob. Or 2 quid. There you are." "I don't want 2 quid. Not for one neither. For taking my wife to a dance on New Year's night," said Johnny Mears. "Run and put on your best bib and tucker, Mary." And she hurried to dress, as eager and excited and smiling to herself as girlishly as she had done on such occasions, odd evenings before the bright New Year's night, 20 years ago. Thank you so much, my friends, for joining me today, and thank you for spending the last year and a half with me. Myself, Andrew, and Chuckles are very excited to start off with new stories this year, 2025. So join us every Sunday at 3 p.m. as we bring you back into stories from all over the world. And until then, our YouTube and podcasting channels are absolutely filled with stories we've already told. As we continue to grow and improve together, there's never a bad time to look back on how far we've already come. Every day is a great day to stay a while and listen.